I really appreciated that right up front in that chapter, Jefferson defines confidence as a feeling. It's not an action. And assertive voice is one way to be perceived as more confident.
Welcome to Life from Within, a show about transforming how we live and lead from the inside out. I'm your host, Kelly Dwyer. Today, I'm joined by Alessandra Zielinski, an executive coach and educator with 20 years of experience in the private and nonprofit sectors. She also teaches intercultural communication at American University and brings a truly global lens after having lived and worked in 7 different countries. In this episode, we dive into Jefferson Fisher's book, The Next Conversation. We unpack how to sound confident without posturing, how you can use the phrases, I'm confident that, and I see it differently, to your advantage, how to prep for tough conversations, and what to do about defensiveness, yours and theirs. If you've ever left a conversation or meeting wishing you'd said it differently, or you want a few phrases to keep in your back pocket, this one's for you. Hi, Alessandra. Welcome to the show. So happy to have this conversation with you today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Okay, so we are here together today because we both read the same book called The Next Conversation, written by Jefferson Fisher. I'll be honest, I read the book because I saw that you were reading the book. So tell me, what drew you to the book in the first place?
This book was a recommendation from one of my clients. I'm always looking for new books to read on communication. It's sort of a personal passion area of mine because I feel like always an area where I need to grow. I teach a course on communication, and communication is actually one of the top 3 things that my coaching clients want to work on in our coaching sessions. And so I'm always looking for a new resource that I can use to bring some tips and tricks to my clients, or that they can read or listen to reinforce some of the stuff that we're talking about in our coaching sessions.
Like you personally, working on communication is a lifelong thing for me, and also a frequent topic of conversation in coaching sessions. You know, when we're working with the leaders that we work with, there are the hard skills that they kind of already have mastered. And so what we end up working on much of the time are these interpersonal skills and dynamics and helping them navigate those. What was your biggest takeaway from the book that you put into practice right away?
The chapter that drew me most and that stood out most over the course of reading the book was chapter 7 on assertive voice. Because it's interesting, lately I've had just a number of clients, male and female, coming into the coaching relationship saying, one of the things I want to do is increase my confidence. And so I really appreciated that right up front in that chapter, Jefferson defines confidence as a feeling. It's not an action. Assertive voice is one way to be perceived as more confident or to sound more confident. So I appreciated that distinction a lot. And I think that my takeaway from the chapter as a whole was really about how do we edit ourselves? So it's not about becoming a whole new person. It's not about fake it till you make it, try on a whole new style. It's about eliminating a few words and phrases from your vocabulary, from your way of speaking, from your emails, for example, so that you are more direct and more assertive in your communication. Things like removing hedging language, maybe sort of removing disclaimers like, well, I might be wrong, but, or taking out tag questions where at the end of a statement, someone will say, don't you think? Or, right? As if they need the validation from the other person. The other one that I thought was so obvious, but I had never come across it before, was just to use the phrase in your sentences, I'm confident that.
Yes, yes. When I read that, I thought, oh, yes, I am going to start using this. And in fact, I do.
Yeah.
I'm using it in emails. I'm using it in conversation. You said a few things there. One was talking about confidence as a feeling. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. That really resonated when I read that in the book. And what I am frequently telling my clients is confidence is an outcome. It's a result of taking action. The confidence comes after you take the action, not before. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as coaches, there's the communication piece of this, right? How are we perceived as more confident? How can we be more direct in our language, or as he says, more assertive? But there's also the inner dialogue that's going on that I'm sure you also deal with a lot with your clients, is unpacking what is leading them not to feel confident. Is it that they feel that they don't belong? Is it feel that they feel that they don't know enough yet? And how can we work on those other pieces? So I do think there's a lot more to the confidence question, obviously, than just communication.
What you just said there was, it's also useful to dive a little deeper and understand what's standing in the way of a natural starting level of confidence. When you're in a session with a coachee, let's say, and they need help prepping for a conversation, do you first take them through, well, what's standing in the way? Or do you go right into prepping them logistically for the conversation, practically?
Yeah, it depends on the client, obviously, and it depends on the scenario. Sometimes a coachee may come into a session and say, I'm about to go have a conversation with the CEO about my annual performance review, and I am so upset right now. And we're going to go straight into the tactical. How do we, and again, this is one of the things I appreciate about Jefferson's book, start from that place of self-awareness and preparation. I love how he describes how much prep work he does with his clients to prepare them to be on the stand, because he's a trial lawyer. And I'm doing a lot of that with my clients live in our coaching sessions, where we're trying to hone in on what makes this conversation particularly difficult for them. What are some of the emotions that they're feeling? What is the outcome that they're hoping for? So we're getting to a lot of what he talks about throughout the book in our coaching session as it is. And oftentimes we'll do a role reversal where I will play them. And of course, it's much easier for me as an outside, more objective person, not involved in the deep emotion, to play out what it could sound like to confront someone about their poor performance or whatever it is that's making that conversation difficult.
There's two things. You said, well, what's the outcome they want from the conversation? And I think it's important to ask that. Well, what do you want? What do you want from the conversation? What do you want to walk away with from the conversation? So that's thing one. There's also well, who do you want to be? Who do you want to show up as? I feel like that's an important question and something for people to contemplate, because that informs their approach. If I want to show up as someone who is decisive and authoritative, that'll show up in your tone of voice. That'll show up in the words that you choose to use. That'll show up in your opening question or your opening statement, right?
Well, I also use the example of a breaking up with someone or being broken up with, let's say. Imagine yourself 5 years in the future, and who do you need to be in that conversation? How do you want to show up in that conversation so that your future self can look back and feel proud of how you acted? And I think that he gives some tactical advice throughout the book that helps the reader think about some of those things. He talks about word choice. Oftentimes, again, with clients, we're talking about the emotion that they're bringing in, either an emotion that they are going to need to let go of in order to show up and be effective, or an emotion they could lean into as a way to bring more power to the conversation. So, as someone who's conflict avoidant, if I show up as angry, that may actually be sending a message to the person I'm talking to that I'm quite serious, because it's not very often that I get that angry. I like to think about using emotion strategically within these conversations as well. And again, back to thinking about word choice, tone, body language that matches the overall emotional tenor that you want to go for, and how that matches the outcome that you're hoping for.
Yeah, I mean, we're really hitting home on the value of preparation. And there's John Wooden, a famous basketball coach. There's a phrase of his that said, "Failing to prepare is preparing to fail."
Mhm.
So I think that's that's a good point. And I also have to say that chapter 7 assertive voice was my favorite, because I think prior to that in the book, I felt like he was really talking to the person that is more likely to be extremely emotional and escalate things pretty quickly and be willing to go nuclear. That's not me. I come in as one of those people who's more likely to withhold what I'm really thinking or what I need or what I want for fear of disconnection in the relationship or for fear of anger that might come my way. So I think that's why the chapter 7, assertive voice, because it does give practical tips of how to actually say the things that you need to say. I think some people are conditioned to focus on de-escalation as soon as possible, conflict avoidant, whatever you want to call it, right? There needs to be a healthy level of authenticity for the conversation to progress. So like you said, bringing some anger, allowing some of the real anger to come through without it controlling you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the risk, right? For those of us that are conflict avoidant, that were conditioned that way, I think both Brene Brown and the researcher Susan David talk about bottling the emotion, bottling our feelings in order to avoid a conflict. We're actually putting at risk having that pop up at a very inopportune time, right? And Jefferson Fisher talks towards the end of the book about choosing the timing of your conversation well, so that you can set yourself up for success, which I absolutely agree with. And as someone who has a harder time getting my words out when it comes to beginning a difficult conversation, I had to create a rule for myself where, sometimes someone may say something and 10, 20 minutes later you start thinking about it like, oh, really bothered me. But the moment has passed. And I'm not going to turn around and go back and say, that thing you said 15 minutes ago, that really bugs me. But I made a rule that I would kind of take note of those times. And if that behavior happened a second time, let's say someone made a disrespectful remark or a condescending remark, then it's not just a one-off that can be ignored, but there's the beginnings of a pattern. And so then I take note of that and promise myself that if that thing happens a third time, I'll say something right in the moment. So that third instance of the condescending remark, or let's say I had an instance where someone was dismissing my taste in movies, seems really minor. But again, for me, as someone who's been conditioned as conflict avoidant, it was a good opportunity to practice. Hey, that's the third time that you've made a snide remark about my taste in film. And just because I like something different than you do doesn't mean that you need to put me down for, what I enjoy watching. And it's funny because even saying that to you, Kelly, and reliving that moment, it's like there's part of me that's getting a little bit anxious. But again, this was a very simple way for me to push myself to practice, to be more willing to engage in the moment instead of coming back and having a big conversation, 3 days later. Just use that to prompt, okay, here's the minute where I'm going to have that conversation just real quick right now.
I love that. What a great rule. And I've heard it also, the first time is an incident, the second time is a coincidence, third time it's a pattern. And I think that for those of us who might be even more conflict avoidant than Alessandra, you don't lose the opportunity of addressing the pattern if you don't happen to call it out in the moment that the third time happens, right? And that's something I actually had to learn over time. These tough conversations or expressing myself, standing up for myself in some way, it doesn't have to be a one and done conversation. It actually could happen over the course of a couple conversations. So like if the first conversation doesn't go as planned or gets aborted early, that doesn't mean we can't bring it up again.
Yeah.
Right. Until it's resolved to a place of, sufficiency.
And I think, what is it? Do you need a moment to cool down and gather your thoughts? Or in my case, the little push was because if I overthink or ruminate, it may never happen, or I may blow it out of proportion, sort of make it seem like a bigger deal than it is. That's why it works for me. But I agree with you. Sometimes actually choosing to let it be for the moment and come back to it could be the right option.
It could be. But with you addressing it in the moment of the third time that it happens, I think we talked a little bit earlier about the confidence, right? The confidence is the outcome, the confidence is the feeling, and there's sort of this virtuous cycle that happens. We feel more confident after we assert ourselves, and therefore then we feel more confident to assert ourselves the next time. So confidence is one way to describe it, but also I would say that you demonstrated a level of self-trust in being able to address it right in that moment. Trust in yourself to be able to formulate the words to express what you needed to express without putting the person so far on the defensive that it spins out into something that is not productive in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and we should come back to defensiveness later.
Oh, well,
There are-
why wait? Let's talk about it.
Well, I did want to throw in one important caveat I have to chapter 7 on
Okay.
assertive voice. And I think it's really important to mention that, Jefferson Fisher is a white male lawyer. So showing up as assertive is natural, it's expected based on his identity, based on his positional power, his authority as a lawyer. And being assertive is a tricky thing for women and people of color often, where there might be a fine line in standing up for yourself, in giving others the feeling of confidence versus being seen as bossy or being seen as aggressive. Bias in terms of how people perceive us based on our identity and our position of power, what's acceptable or accepted by others is real and I think should be acknowledged. Adam Grant actually wrote an interesting article a while back, but maybe we can link it in the show notes, where he cites a bunch of research saying that women's use of weak language, the sort of hedging language, is often quite strategic because in showing some deference to a person in power and in making sure that we don't give the impression of being arrogant, we may be more likely to get to the outcome that we want, like asking for a raise. And I do feel like Jefferson Fisher missed acknowledging these sort of like race, power, and gender dynamics that can impact communication. A book that I think does a really good job of this is Amy Gallo's Getting Along, where she talks about how to approach communicating with different types of people based on personality type. And then within each of those, she kind of walks through, what do you do if the person you're talking to is your boss, or many other different examples.
You made mention of an article by Adam Grant, and you made the point that what Adam said in the article was the softeners can sometimes actually assist in getting the outcome you want. And I thought, well, I wonder how much does that have to do with the double bind that, in particular for women, right? The double bind around you can't be both perceived as likable and capable. The more likable you are, the less capable people think you are. And the more capable you are, the less likable people think you are. And so by adding the softener, you're sort of hedging towards, you can like me still, even though I'm going to say this thing that I'm going to say next. But I'm still likable.
Yeah.
Right.
It's complicated. And this is why even the highest level executives and leaders are still coming into a coaching session and wanting to work on communication, because every conversation, every person that you encounter is going to be different and present its own challenges for you. I mean, when I think about communication as a coaching topic, I really think about it as what you said earlier, which is it's the interpersonal. It's about working effectively with others and how we are trying to communicate our message in a way that they will hear us.
Absolutely. And to your point about context matters. Are you speaking to someone you report into? Are you speaking to a peer and trying to influence your peer? Are you speaking to a direct report, right? That the words you choose, the tone of voice, the body language, all of that
right
should be thought through.
Have the authority in that relationship or not? And I've even encountered recently a few leaders who are having a challenging time embodying a more directive, or we might say assertive, to use Jefferson's language, style of leadership because it doesn't feel like them. There's a discomfort there. And part of, I think, what you were talking about earlier in coaching is that being. Who do you want to be? And so there may be, again, some inner dialogue to work on around it's okay to be assertive, to hold somebody accountable. It's not the same thing as being mean.
Right. Now, you had said there was a point you wanted to make about defensiveness.
Yeah. One of the last chapters in the book, chapter 11, was probably my second favorite around defensiveness. And Jefferson talks about how to be less defensive. What are some strategies in communication we can use so that we are not perceived as defensive? And obviously, in his work as a trial lawyer, being perceived as defensive could be the same as being perceived as being guilty.
Right, right.
So in his line of work, it's particularly important. But, when let's say I'm delivering feedback to you and you come off as defensive, I'm going to feel like you're not hearing me. And then he also gave some tips for how to work with others in a conversation to decrease their likelihood of defensiveness. And I thought there were a bunch of really great reminders about fighting fair that we all need to hear over and over and over again. Things like, don't say, will you always forget to load the dishwasher? Or don't deflect, when you're confronted with a different accusation. Oh yeah, well, you never make the bed. That's not a way to go, right? It's not a
Right.
productive conversation.
Right.
Did that and made me laugh a little bit. Were there any things in the defensiveness chapter that you found particularly resonated with you?
I was particularly captured by difficult people. So there was a couple things in the difficult people chapter. The justification apology.
Yeah.
I was just kidding, or I was just joking, or I was just, that one gets my goat. And his comeback is the best. Your response, well, then be funnier.
Yeah.
Or then find new material. Or,
Mm.
I was just messing around. Well, I wasn't. So that was good. We're almost at time here. Okay, I will finish with this, and then if there's one final comment you want to make, you can. In addition to using the phrase, I'm confident that, right, incorporating that phrase, he made the distinction of another way to prevent people from getting defensive is to say, well, I see things differently, or the way I see this is. And so you're signaling to the other person that you're sharing your perspective. And I like that. And I've been using that already around the house.
Right.
I think it's a good book. I do recommend people read it. Alessandra, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I feel like there are a number of phrases, just like the ones you pulled out, that were particularly helpful to you that you're going to go out and try now. Again, these small little shifts. I do recommend this book. He's made a whole library of little short videos where he's capturing these pieces of advice. I think the chapter on assertive voice, he has a compilation of a whole hour's worth of short 30-second tips. So those are fantastic. He was really fun to listen to. He has a very nice Southern accent, by the way. So some audiobooks can be a little irritating, but this one was actually a lovely listen. And again, for those who prefer video, I know that he is on TikTok and he does have a YouTube channel. So it's very easy to Google. If you put in Jefferson Fisher, assertive voice or confidence, you're going to get a series of videos to watch that are summarizing some of these tips.
Awesome. Thank you, Alessandra. If people want to follow up with you after hearing this episode or watching this episode, where can they find you?
Yeah, well, I am on LinkedIn and I have a website under my name, alessandrazielinski.com, which has a contact form, easiest way to get in touch with me. Of course, my name is a little bit difficult to spell, which makes it complicated, but we can put a link in the show notes. The positive side of that is there aren't that many Alessandra Zielinskis out there, so I'm pretty easy to find on Google.
Alessandra with 2 S's.
Correct.
All right. And definitely the link will be in the show notes. Alessandra, thank you for joining me today. I really enjoyed our conversation, and maybe we'll be back with another book in the future.
Yeah. Well, I love talking about books, so I'm happy to. Thanks for inviting me. This was fun, and I hope other folks will check the book out. the next conversation by Jefferson Fisher. Definitely recommend.
Thanks for tuning into Life from Within. See the show notes for links and resources mentioned in today's episode. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, follow, and share it with friends and family who might enjoy it too. You can also leave a review. It helps others discover and benefit from the podcast. Until next time, keep living and leading from the inside out.